Sound, music, sustainability. Welcome to Sustain FM. Hello and welcome to the show. Something a little bit different today. I'm very happy to have JacqNoise as a guest host. Jackie is a sound artist, live performer, modular synth wizard, and regularly gives workshops on building your own instruments with Erica synths and Air instruments. Today, Jackie interviews me for a change, talking about a sustainability and music project in Graz, Austria last year called We Are But Dust and Shadows. So let's get into the conversation.
So Steve, over the years, I've seen a couple of performances, or not a couple, multiple performances of yours in clubs, in galleries, on the radio, in outdoor gardens. It's always impressive of how you combine music creation with the concept that you sketch before you make your performance. So I was wondering, can you introduce why you combine sound, music, and sustainability, and where those links come from?
Cool, thanks. Yeah, it's we have seen each other play a lot. I think it's a big question, but when I think about even back to when I was a kid, I always wanted to make the world a better place. So I always thought that was important. And for me, music was a big part of that, but it never really felt like it was something that I could actually do. It was always like Live Aid and Bob Geldof or We Are the World and Artists Against Apartheid and other people that were doing that. And it took a long time for me to figure out maybe there's actually something that I can actually do to try and make the world a better place. And with my academic research on looking at energy transition and sustainability, I eventually realized that maybe these things could actually fit together, both from telling a better story, but also really thinking about how do you kind of communicate and engage people and connect people in a different way. And I was also really inspired by Billy Bragg, the English folk punk singer, because he said he went to see the Clash play in the 80s when the Clash organized these Rock Against Racism concerts. And that was the first time he saw that music and politics could actually fit together. So that's kind of, I've been inspired both, from seeing other people and really looking at how can we tell a better story and how can we connect sustainability in a different way rather than just charts and graphs and newspaper articles and that kind of thing. So it really kind of powers the way I think about my music and performance. So it's been pretty fun.
I can imagine that Berlin is also very inspiring to see how politics and music are coming together, because if there's a demonstration or if it's a statement, it totally resonates in all the nightclubs or the theater places or cultural in general.
Absolutely. And even with like when the wall came down, like with the club culture of a lot of the techno clubs, when that scene was kind of being born and taking over all these old spaces and the squats, there's definitely a link between that kind of political culture and the underground techno culture in Berlin that's still there. I mean, techno in Berlin has become a lot more commercial than it was in the 90s, but there still is that feeling of the underground political nature of the clubs and music that's still there, I think.
And that's also the question that I want to ask next is, you're also often in Graz, and do you see the same kind of subcultures in Graz, or how do you see the city and how did you end up there?
So the first thing I noticed about Graz compared to Berlin, it's very clean. The streets are clean and the trams are clean and the trains are clean, everything like that. It's obviously a very wealthy city. But I ended up there doing a artistic research residency at the Institute for Electronic Music at the Arts University there. And the idea was to explore sound and sustainability, but through a bit of an interesting lens, because I'd been to Austria before and I'd heard that Graz was very beautiful, and it is a very beautiful city. But I learned from actually even like through the interview process and talking to some of the professors there, it's one of the most beautiful cities in Austria, but it also has one of the highest incidences of lung disease there. And because it's sort of one of the reasons it's so beautiful, it's kind of a natural bowl surrounded by mountains, which makes it look really pretty. But the mountains act as like a natural bowl that traps all of the air pollution and diesel emissions, and the weather systems kind of act like a lid on the bowl that literally just keeps everything there, compared to a city like Berlin, which is kind of more open and the winds are sort of blowing all the pollution away. In Graz, the pollution actually just stays there. So I was interested in exploring. I hadn't really done very much around air pollution and health and sustainability. It's obviously an important dimension, but my work had been focused more on climate change and CO2 emissions and energy. So it was an interesting chance to do a residency there and learn more about that sort of health, air quality side, and also develop a performance that was using that data in some way. And at the beginning, I didn't really know how that was going to work, but that was kind of the proposal that I sent into them, and they thought it was a cool idea. So I ended up getting a 3-month artistic research residency there to explore some of those ideas.
Is this also related to the title of your work that you recently performed? Maybe we hear the performance after this interview.
Mm-hmm.
Do we hear the performance after the interview?
Yes, yeah. Well, I'll share the performance at the end, and so the title is called "We Are But Dust and Shadows," which is a quote from. Okay, I really should get this right. I'm pretty sure he was a Greek historian, Horace, that was writing about like 500 years BC. So I was really interested in this idea of dust and floating and particles, and what are the ideas that inspires. And I found that quote, and I thought that was an interesting idea, that because there's lots of sort of cliches of ashes to ashes, dust to dust. We're all made of stardust. We're all made of dust. And it's kind of an interesting and nice literature idea, but it's actually true that we are just made up of dust. We are just made up of these particles. And we're also constantly surrounded by these things. The air is all around us. We're always influenced by the air. We're inhaling dust. But what I found was interesting is that unless the air quality gets really, really bad, or unless you're actually standing next to a diesel truck, you don't really notice the air that you're breathing, even though it's around us all the time. We're part of this, and we're made up of the dust and the air that we inhale and the shadows that we walk through and the shadows that we cast, but we're not really aware of that. And I thought that was kind of interesting, which is one of the things that I love about sound in general, is that it can make audible things that are around us anyway, but we don't really notice, in the way that great visual artists can, show us the world in a different way that we didn't notice before. So I was kind of excited about, okay, what would that be like doing that through sound instead of through visual art? And so dust and shadows were some of the ideas I was playing with as I was thinking through what kind of environment I wanted to create, I guess, what kind of feeling I wanted to get across for the audience when I was thinking about that performance.
Yeah, and that also leads to the second introduction of your piece, is that it is based on data, the sonification of data that is presented in CO2. We have seen a couple of those performances before in Fritzroy or Lark, with Berlin Modeler Society, with visualization of it and a singer. What is different this time?
Yeah, so that last piece, Can You Hear the Earth Breathing, was, I think, interesting, but also a fairly straightforward way of data sonification, and basically taking carbon dioxide data and translating that into sound, where every data point triggers a new note, and you sort of map to say, okay, a low amount of CO2 is a low note and a high amount of CO2 is a high note. So you can hear the sound of the climate change. And that was interesting, but I wanted to sort of see is there something that could be done a little bit more, I don't even know what maybe less obvious of it, not just having it the note. So this idea of being surrounded by the air and surrounded by air that we're not noticing was sort of the inspiration for that. So I worked with Lisa Canola again, who did the data artistry and translation. And so we took particulate matter data, nitrous oxide, temperature, humidity, and translated that into MIDI. But instead of using that to directly trigger notes and be the note value, instead we had 4 different signals that were doing different modulations. So changing filter cutoffs, changing volume levels, changing panning, changing the timbre of an oscillator, changing the FM levels, all these things that affect the sound that people were hearing, but maybe not in an obvious way. So those were continually evolving and changing as those levels change over time. So it's continually changing the environment, the acoustic environment that people are part of, but not as obvious as notes getting higher over time. So it's sort of this idea of being surrounded by dust, surrounded by the air. And it was kind of interesting because I'm not sure if it's not as obvious, which I thought was interesting artistically, but since it's not as obvious, it means that the audience doesn't necessarily notice it as much. So it's a bit of a balance between how much is sort of direct in your face and then how much is sort of underneath, sort of shaping the performance of what people are listening to. And I think the other big difference is, Earth Breathing was very much of a sit down, close your eyes, sound art, experimental music kind of performance. But We Are But Dust and Shadows is very much techno. So like dance environment, hard beats, kick drums, synthesizers. So it's a different sonic experience being more of in a club-based environment than in a sort of an art gallery listening to the music.
Yeah. And also in our performances, we both know each other as musicians that like to improvise in their sets, in their live set. I can imagine with this data set and a non-live projection, you kind of have to rehearse with it and know this is the set given and this is the space that you improvise. And in the video, you see that the first 6 minutes you take time to explore sounds, to use the granular digital synths, to come up with sound design. How do you see the balance in your set or in this piece between given sounds and improvisation?
Yeah, I really enjoyed the improvisation nature of this. I mean, I think artistically, I was inspired by this idea of when you think about dust or particles, some of the images that come to mind are clouds floating, blowing around. And it just sort of seemed to me to almost demand more improvisation than I often do in a club set. So I did that so all of the drum patterns were improvised, all of the sequencer patterns were improvised. And so the only thing that was pre-prepared was the data that had been translated into MIDI. So that was basically playing one 45-minute long MIDI file. So that was continuous. But I kind of almost deliberately did not rehearse with that. So there was 4 channels of MIDI that were going into the IntelliGel MIDI to CV. So I had 4 channels of modulation coming out. And I knew that the data sets would be changing over time, but I kind of deliberately didn't look too much at the data. I wanted to be able to react to what modulations were happening. So at different moments, I would take the same modulation set, because as you know, the cool thing about modular synths is if you've got voltages changing, that can change pitch, or it can change filter cutoff, it can change LFO speed, whatever you want. So I kind of deliberately chose to respond to that in real time, that if one of the modulations was being sent to a filter cutoff and that didn't sound right, or I wasn't happy with that, I just felt free to unplug that from the filter cutoff and plug that into something else. Or to say, okay, maybe I'll just stick with this. Maybe it doesn't feel right, but maybe I'll just sort of see what it's like to have this dissonant change that I didn't expect, that doesn't sound what I wanted, but maybe I'll kind of live with that and kind of go with that. And then some of the other things like playing with the air instruments, cloud busting, which I love. And it's almost impossible to pre-program and kind of recreate anything, which was also kind of really interesting because it sort of gave these that were also not, because I was playing with that, generating sort of rhythmic elements, but it's not clocked. So I was sort of like manually adjusting the tempo. So it was like almost exactly on the beat, but not quite, and then drifting across. So yeah, I feel like maybe rambling a little bit with a long answer, but I really wanted to play with what's prepared and what's not, what's improvised, but I think for me the biggest thing was not just improvising for the sake of improvising, but actually responding to changes, responding to sounds, and thinking about how I actually navigate those new sounds and new patterns that are kind of coming in. So yeah, it was a really fun experience doing that.
Yes, good to hear it in a summary. We have been talking about this for so many years, and every time there's a new aspect of it coming in a new piece coming out, and we partly also use the same gear, for example, the cloud busting, and I also noticed that it is very unpredictable.
Yes.
And then it's like other utilities who are bringing it back into sync, like using a VCA to amplify it within a structure, or using the same LFO to manipulate one of the parameters. I feel that the nowadays performances have more spatial audio in it, and I think your rig is also one of the great hardware tools to bring in space to certain effects, or with certain effects, or to pan certain channels in a structured and unstructured way. You played at the IEM,
yes.
IEM, where there were like different speakers, and they talked about surround sounds and ambisonics. Did you play with the spatial audio set? Did you pan the sound in a way?
Yeah, I did. It was pretty fun. I wish I'd had more time to experiment with that, because they've got a 24 speaker array. So they've got a ring of speakers sort of at head height all around the room, and then another ring of speakers overhead, and then another speaker directly overhead, and then subs at the front and the back, and also on the sides. So I kind of did that a bit manually, where in the patch bay I set up, I had I think 4 buses in my mixer that I was using, so I could send sounds to the front or to the back or straight ahead, and also up top. So I was kind of doing that manually with some of the different sounds, like some of the vocal samples, for example, were only coming from above to kind of give that sort of feeling it's coming from the clouds. And then I was also using a couple of modules to move sounds around the Mystic Circuits 3D VCA that does, especially if you're sending an LFO to that, you can pan left and right and front and back. And then I was also sending that into, I can never pronounce it properly, Wrong or Warring, their sound stage, which basically allows you to kind of split the frequency levels from low to high, and also left, right. So you can choose whether you're sending bass notes just down the center, or only the high frequencies of that to the side. So I was kind of playing with that within the left, right. And it was a lot of fun. But I think to make the full use of that, you would really need to be using a computer as kind of your centerpiece, and sending out 24 channels of audio into an audio interface that was going out to 24 outputs. And then you could do really interesting things, because you can do some great surround sound, like quad, or maybe a little bit more with modular. But to really take advantage of that, you'd really want 24 outputs that had 24 LFOs and 24 VCAs and 24 filters, and that gets to be a pretty big rack if you're going to do it that way. So I'd love to go back and play more with that. So I think in the audio recording of the performance, you can only hear the left and right, but in the room you could actually hear above and below and front and back and left and right. So not a full ambisonics performance, but it definitely kind of felt in that environment. And then the kick drum was straight down the middle from the front and the back. So it was kind of getting a quasi surround sound, I guess. But I think it sounded pretty cool in the room.
Yeah, cool. Let's have a listen to it. I mean, enough talking. We should listen to it and place the words into the sound and give the work a meaning. It's a 46-minute piece.
Yep.
And,
so
that will fill up the next hour.
Awesome. Cool. Thanks for the chat. And so let's take a listen.
Yeah, cool.
right, thanks for listening. As always, check out the show notes for more on the project and links to the performance video to hear the whole thing. We missed the last few minutes of the performance fitting into our 1 hour time slot here. Also a link to an artist talk from the event that goes into a lot more detail on sound, music, and sustainability, more about air quality and GRATs, and also a link to some air quality reports from the European Environment Agency. Be sure to sign up for our email list at sustain.fm. Follow us on Instagram and our new YouTube channel at sustain.fm as well. See you next time.